The path to the manor was narrow, winding along the cliff's edge like a scar carved into the earth. Few dared walk it after dusk, for once the sun dipped below the horizon, the sea mist rose in thick veils that swallowed all sound and sight. It was within this mist that the house seemed most alive, its outline shifting in the half-light as though breathing with the tide itself. Travelers who stumbled upon the path often described the same sensation, the world behind them dissolving into nothingness and the world ahead becoming the only direction they could follow. Turning back was not forbidden, but it always felt strangely impossible. Something compelled the step forward, the crunch of gravel beneath hesitant boots, the tightening of the air, the whisper of unseen watchers pressing closer with each breath. The gate, when reached, bore its own silent warning. Rust had eaten away much of its iron, yet it stood tall, resolute, a sentinel between the living and the forgotten. Symbols were scratched into the stone pillars, not recent, but old, far older than the iron itself. Their shapes were crude, yet deliberate, spirals and angles that defied the eye, marks that seemed to shift if stared at too long. No record remained of who had carved them, but the townsfolk knew better than to touch them. To brush one's hand against the stone was to invite dreams too vivid, too long, dreams that did not belong to the dreamer at all. Once inside the grounds, the air grew still. The wind that battered the cliffs seemed to falter as though unwilling to trespass beyond the gate. Trees grew there, but they were not the same as those along the coast. Their trunks twisted unnaturally, bark flaking like dried skin, branches reaching inward as though bowing to some unseen master. The soil was bare in patches, blackened and brittle, yet now and again a faint glimmer of something pale could be seen just beneath the surface, like fragments of bone pushed upward by time. The path curved toward the front steps, each stone worn and cracked, slick with moss that gleamed faintly in the moonlight. The door itself loomed at the top, weathered but strangely intact. Its wood was dark, heavy, and scarred by scratches too deep to have been made by tools. The marks trailed across the surface in chaotic patterns, as though many hands, or claws, had once clawed desperately at it from within. Above the doorway, the house rose in tiers of shadow and decay. Windows stood broken or boarded, yet some appeared oddly clean, their glass reflecting light from no discernible source. Those who dared to gaze too long swore they saw movement behind the panes, faint and fleeting, shapes too tall to be human, drifting slowly from room to room as though patrolling a domain long forgotten by the world outside. Stepping inside, the first impression was one of suffocation. Dust lay thick upon every surface, yet the air smelled not of dust but of salt and something older, something metallic that clung to the back of the throat. The hall stretched ahead, wide and cavernous, its walls lined with portraits blackened by smoke or time. Faces peered from the gloom, some recognizable as men and women, others obscured by mold until only the suggestion of eyes remained. There was no sound of vermin, no scuttle of mice or drip of water. The silence was so complete it pressed against the eardrums until each heartbeat thundered like a drumbeat in the void. The floorboards gave no protest beneath cautious steps, though some swore they felt the faintest vibration, as if the wood pulsed like living flesh. Stairs rose to either side, sweeping upward into the darkness, their banisters coated with dust that felt strangely warm to the touch. The walls bore faint stains, long streaks that ran downward, their origins best left unimagined. And always there was the sound, faint at first, barely noticed above the thrum of blood in one's ears. A steady rhythm, like breathing, or like the sea against the rocks far below. Yet the longer one listened, the more certain it became that the sound was within the house, beneath the floorboards, within the walls themselves. It rose and fell in cycles, patient, ceaseless, as though the house itself were alive and waiting. The longer one wandered through the halls, the heavier the air became. Even light seemed hesitant, slipping through cracks and windows in pale, quivering beams. Dust motes hung in the air, drifting lazily, yet somehow avoiding certain corners, as if the shadows themselves rejected light. Rooms opened into one another, yet doors appeared where none had been before. Hallways looped back upon themselves, corridors narrowing and widening in impossible ways. The floor plan was chaotic, yet deliberate, as if designed to disorient and ensnare any who dared traverse it. The portraits lining the walls seemed to watch, their faces subtly shifting when glanced at indirectly. The eyes followed not merely with paint, but with a presence, cold and unwavering. Whispered impressions filled the mind, not words but emotions. Fear, regret, despair, all pressing with the weight of centuries. The grand staircase led to the upper floors, its steps groaning with each careful descent. Along the banisters, scratches ran in chaotic patterns, some deep enough to catch a fingernail. They seemed to tell a story, fragmented, violent, and endless, of those who had ventured here before. At the top, the hall opened into a long gallery. Windows along one side overlooked the cliffs, the sea beyond faintly visible in the fog. The other side was lined with doors, each one closed, yet faint whispers emanated from behind them. Some spoke of sorrow, others of rage, and some conveyed nothing but silence more profound than death. The center of the gallery was dominated by a single mirror. Its surface was cloudy, yet it reflected not the room but vague forms behind the viewer, shapes that existed in no known dimension. Looking into it, one felt the pull of the house itself, a force that was patient and ancient, coaxing the observer to step closer, to surrender entirely. Footsteps echoed above and below, though no one could be seen. The house seemed to breathe in rhythm with the heartbeat of any who walked its floors. It was subtle, barely noticeable at first, yet impossible to ignore after time. Each exhale of the house pressed against the chest. Each inhale whispered dread into the mind. Beyond the gallery, the corridor narrowed until it felt as if the walls themselves had grown closer. Faint light flickered along the edges, revealing textures not of wood or plaster, but of something organic, something living. The sound that had been distant, faint thudding a pulse, now rose in prominence, steady, patient, inevitable. In some rooms, the floorboards seemed to tremble beneath careful steps. Walls whispered faintly, as though voices were trapped behind them, murmuring truths too old to comprehend. Every corner held a secret. Every shadow hid an eye. Every faint flicker of light suggested movement that was not human. The house did not merely exist, it extended its influence outward. The fog beyond the windows, the cliffs below, even the distant town, all felt its pull. It was patience incarnate, waiting for curiosity to guide the next visitor into its folds. The morning that followed was dim and brittle, the pale sunlight filtering weakly through a canopy of dense clouds. The forest remained shrouded in a damp silence, broken only by the occasional caw of a distant crow. The house, still heavy with the chill of night, felt less like a place of shelter and more like an immense organism that breathed faintly, aware of the presence inside it. Each room seemed to contract and expand, walls groaning as though restless in their own confinement. Dust hung in the air like fine ash, drifting lazily in shafts of murky light. Paintings long since ruined by damp and neglect bore only vague smudges of color, their subjects erased by time. Yet, despite their ruined forms, there was a sense that something still resided within the canvas, eyes that once existed, faces that once smiled, lingering like shadows too stubborn to vanish. The staircases revealed further secrets. On one landing, a narrow window overlooked the forest edge, where mist clung to the trees in a low band of gray. Beyond, the outline of crooked gravestones emerged faintly. They stood in uneven rows, swallowed by weeds, the earth heaving as though disturbed repeatedly over decades. The burial ground appeared older than the house itself, its stones leaning under the weight of centuries. Moss and weeds swallowed the inscriptions, leaving only faint traces of names and dates long forgotten. The ground was uneven, the earth heaving as though restless beneath the surface, hinting at secrets best left untouched. From the shadows of the trees, the wind carried whispers, subtle and unintelligible, yet unmistakably deliberate. It was as if the forest itself was aware of the house and the restless spirits it contained. The fog seemed to cling more densely here, each breath tasting faintly of iron and decay. Returning to the house, the atmosphere grew heavier, almost viscous, pressing against every inch of the skin. The halls had shifted once more, doors were gone, corridors elongated, and ceilings seemed higher than memory allowed. Shadows moved with intent, brushing against the edges of vision, leaving a trail of unease in every step. Every floorboard creak, every distant thump seemed magnified, echoing through unseen chambers. The air vibrated faintly, as though carrying a low, persistent pulse, synchronized with the very heartbeat of the house. Light was scarce, and yet, even in darkness, the walls shimmered faintly, reflecting shapes that were not truly there. In the grand gallery, the mirror now appeared more ominous, its surface swirling faintly, as if the glass itself were breathing. Shapes formed and dissolved within, teasing the mind with fleeting glimpses of faces contorted in anguish or malice. The sense of being watched intensified. Every glance toward the mirror brought the chilling impression that something was inching closer, unseen but aware. The whispers returned, louder now, threading into the mind with persistent insistence. Each room of the house seemed to resonate with the mirror, amplifying the presence it contained. Even the air felt alive, thick with anticipation, as though the house were preparing for some inevitable moment of revelation. The upper floors stretched endlessly, hallways folding in impossible geometries. Doors led to rooms that did not exist moments before, and ceilings arched at angles that defied reason. The house seemed to sense the presence of the intruder, adjusting its layout to keep the wanderer disoriented and enclosed. Faint lights flickered along the walls, revealing textures of walls that seemed almost organic, pulsing slightly with a rhythm in sync with the heartbeat. Shadows flickered and merged, taking on forms that were humanoid yet disturbingly alien. The air smelled of damp earth and rust, growing heavier with each passing moment. In the deepest corridors, the floorboards throbbed subtly beneath each step, as if the house itself had a pulse. Whispers echoed from the walls, weaving thoughts and images too vivid and unreal to be purely imagined. Shapes shifted in the corner of vision, tall, faceless, silent, but always present, always watching. The grand staircase now seemed infinite, spiraling upward into darkness that swallowed all light. Every step taken felt heavier, each breath colder, as though the house drew warmth from the intruder. And still the mirror in the gallery remained in memory, a focal point for the house's awareness, its surface alive and aware. Finally, at the very top, the attic door appeared, narrow, warped, and uninviting. The air before it shimmered faintly, carrying whispers that promised revelation and terror in equal measure. Stepping inside, the space seemed impossibly vast, stretching beyond the physical limits of the house. The final room was silent, yet alive, a void that pulsed with presence. The mirror stood at the center, more vivid than ever, swirling with shadows and shapes from every floor, corridor, and chamber below. The house exhaled, a deep resonant sound, and in that moment, the boundaries between observer and house blurred, leaving only the awareness that some places were never meant to be entered, and some mysteries were eternal.